22nd of November 2013, Chennai, India.
Quite impressive at just 22 years old. But the game is not over and anything can happen in chess.
Magnus Carlsen is 6-3 up in Game 10 of his series with world champion Vishy Anand. A draw, and he is world champion.
We've had a move, and the move we expected. So that's good. Queen e3 check, move 58.
We're in the endgame. Carlsen has 3 pawns and a queen. Anand has a knight and a queen. Suddenly...
Oh, I see the idea now.
Oh, and the end is here.
Really nice. I mean, he calculated it till the very end.
Oh my goodness.
And it's almost forced.
And it's forced.
Carlsen forces a queen swap. There's nothing else for it. The pieces are slowly traded off. The only possible outcome is a draw.
Oh my
this is
God.
It.
We
have a new world champion.
Carlsen is champion of the world. 6 years later, Carlsen is top of another world, a quite different world. This weekend, a tweet.
Bio needed an update.
It reads, the new bio?
World chess champion, the highest ranked chess player in the world, current #1 Fantasy Premier League player.
Magnus Carlsen is now the highest ranked chess player and Fantasy Premier League player in the world. In this episode we ask, how did it happen that a chess genius made his way to the top in fantasy football? What, in other words, does chess have to do with fantasy football?
Magnus Carlsen is perhaps the greatest chess player that has ever lived.
Tarjei Svensen is front editor at Scandinavia Online and a chess journalist at Matt and Patt.
Only 29 years old, he still has plenty of years to stay on top, but they're already now discussing whether he's the greatest ever. He's been the world champion since 2013. He's been #1 more or less since 2010, so already now he has been #1 for 10 years. This year in particular, he has won basically everything there is to win. He has won 8 tournaments. In Norway, he's basically an A-list celebrity. He's one of our top 3 sports stars. Chess is a huge sport in Norway. The interest is massive and we have live coverage of his major events on TV. Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov. Those are names that many people outside chess already know. Now we have Magnus Carlsen.
So if you were to be asked, is he Messi or is he Ronaldo, which one would you liken him to the most?
Well, if you'd ask him, he would probably prefer to be Ronaldo because Ronaldo is one of his favorite players. Personally, I'm more a fan of Messi. I understand the comparisons, but there is no Messi and Ronaldo in chess. There are not 2 players who are basically so close to each other. Carlsen is just one step above the rest.
So he's Messi and Ronaldo?
Yeah, Messi and Ronaldo at the same time, you can say.
Tell us a little bit about Carlsen's rise to fame. You said he's been around for ages. It feels like he's been at the top of the game forever, but he sort of came out of nowhere as well, right?
I've known him since he was 9. It took some years until he made it to the national scene. Of course, he was great, but he wasn't exceptional until a few years later. It was in 2004 when he had this national breakthrough. He won a tournament in the Netherlands, which was not particularly strong, but he was by far the youngest player in the tournament. He was 13 at the time. He played this incredible game. Based on that game, he was labeled as the Mozart of chess by the Washington Post. That made international headlines.
They went to Reykjavik, Iceland, which is where Magnus took a leap into legend when he was matched against Garry Kasparov, the Russian, considered by many to be the greatest ever. Magnus played him to a draw. It was a sensation.
When I actually got the winning position, I had little time. I was nervous and I couldn't finish him off.
Why were you nervous?
I was playing Kasparov. I was intimidated.
You were intimidated by playing the world champion when you were already 13 years old?
Yeah, go figure.
Just a few months later, he became a grandmaster as one of the youngest in the history of chess at 13 years. By that time, he was the current youngest grandmaster in the world, yeah. He got a documentary about him.
Magnus Carlsen is the best in the world. He's a 21-year-old Norwegian, reigned supreme in a sport played by 500 million people. It's chess.
The thing about him was that he was not Russian, he was not from Eastern Europe where chess is a big deal. He was from Norway with basically no tradition for being good at chess. So that also added to all the extra attention that he got. By the time he was 16, 17, he was already among the best players in the world, which was exceptional. He was good at like 13, 14, but only when he was 16, 17, then he was already fighting with the best players in the world, which is kind of unheard of. That was not something normal, especially since he was not from a chess country.
You've mentioned already that you've known Magnus since he was about 9. What's he like as a person?
He's pretty sociable, actually. He's clearly a genius, but I think his close friends don't really... Well, I can imagine that they see that sometimes, but he's just a normal guy, a surprisingly normal guy who likes to hang out with his friends. He likes to go out, he likes to party, he likes to watch football. Basically, just like any other 29-year-old. But the thing is about him is that he's extremely competitive. He likes to compete at either it's a normal board game or it's football or anything, I guess. That's my impression, that he's just very competitive.
He can be quite prickly as well. I was watching the famous clip of him.
You seem to have some hiccups earlier today. You didn't have really smooth performances. And this game wasn't that smooth either. It looked a little bit unclear. What was your feeling overall as the game was transpiring?
What do you want me to do? What do you want from me?
I don't want anything. I just want to see just chess getting played.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking about that the game wasn't smooth enough. Again, what do you want me to do? Well, I mean, do you want me to get a huge advantage from the opening and then to push it all the way? Is that the only way you can win a smooth game? Is that your point?
And then there's the famous Vice article as well.
Carlsen, you are an inspiration to chess and your influence on the game will be seen for centuries. I still love you, but I'm not afraid to say that as a person, you are kind of a dick.
So there's another side to him as well, but perhaps that just comes from being a genius in a world of people who are struggling to catch up all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine it's difficult, but I don't think he sees himself as a genius, because he sees some other sides of himself as well. But it's clear that he's a genius. He's not socially awkward or anything. He's a nice guy, but obviously when you get close to him, he's a different kind of person. That's the impression I get from his friends. I'm on good terms with his friends, and they portray him as a really nice person and generous and all that.
You've played chess against him. What is it like to play against him?
I played against him twice in official games. My first official game against him was when he was 10. We were probably rated at around the same level officially, but it was clear that he was already far better than me at that time. I was 20 and he was 10. He beat me. Then we played again 4 or 5 years later, and by that time he had become a grandmaster. I was actually doing really well in that game. During the game, it was clear that I was doing well, and I could see that he was becoming nervous. You can see that he was not doing well. Magnus has never been good at having a poker face. When he's not happy about his position, you can see that he's not happy. You could see that he wasn't happy, but of course, I realized that I was doing well and I got nervous, which is quite normal when you are doing well against someone who is a lot better than you, and eventually I lost the game. I remember he told me that, yeah, you shouldn't have lost this game, and I was really disappointed, but at least I had played a pretty good game.
Is it noticeable that he is the best player in the world when you play against him? Is it a different level than playing against other very good chess players?
Yeah. It's like facing God, because you know that you can play 1,000 games and you will likely lose every single one of them.
You've mentioned then that he is a football fan and spends a lot of time watching it. You'll have seen that famous clip of Magnus at Euro 2016 where he is caught on camera singing a song about Dmitry Payet.
Igor Payet, Dmitry Payet, I just don't think you understand. He's Super Slavens man. He's better than Zidane. We got Dimitri Payet.
Is that a different Carlsen than the one that chess fans have seen, or is that just a rare insight into what he's actually like when chess is off the table?
I guess he really likes football. He was there and I think he was supporting France. He was a bit of a fan of the West Ham player Dimitri Payet, and he had scored this amazing goal. This was just something that he decided to do when he saw the Norwegian team. It's a bit of a different side of him. It's not a side that you would normally see during chess tournaments, for sure. But it gives you an insight to him that he's not the boring type that you can get the impression that he is from in chess tournaments.
Do you know how Carlsen got into football originally?
Well, I guess it's not that much different from any other person who gets into football. You play at school, you watch TV. He played for a team when he was a kid. He was a regular player, but at some point he couldn't really play that much on team because he was traveling so much to chess events. The only chance that he could be playing for his team and go to trainings and so on was when he was at home, when he was not traveling. But he's been playing regularly football with his friends, and also he's playing for a team. Well, I'm not sure he's as active anymore, but he was playing a bit for a local team the last few years. It's like in the 7th level or something like that, which is a team that consists of some friends.
It's well known that Magnus is a Real Madrid fan. What does his support of Real Madrid look like? Does he get across to watch them regularly, or is most of it done from a distance?
He basically has a direct line to the president of the Real Madrid. He can basically just make a phone call and he will get the VIP tickets and all that. Actually, I'm not sure if you are aware, but he even did a kickoff at the Santiago Bernabeu after he became world champion.
Well, we are about to get things underway. It's a scheduled 8 p.m. start. We have one of those traditional celebrity kickoffs. Rolling the ball back, playing it safe for Real Madrid.
He met Ronaldo. He's been pretty close to Sergio Ramos. Sergio Ramos is a chess fan, so several players that knows him pretty well. There have been times when he brought his friends. He brought his friends to Santiago Bernabeu, so he can easily get tickets. It's not a problem for him. So he's a bit of a star, and Real Madrid tweeted about him occasionally, I think. He's well known in Real Madrid as a fan.
This weekend, Magnus tweeted about fantasy football again. It's obviously been in the news recently that he's pushing up towards the top of the Fantasy Premier League. But this weekend, he actually hit, during live play, number 1, and he changed his bio to reflect that. So fantasy football is clearly something that's important to him. I think it's very easy for people to want to make comparisons between someone being very good at chess, someone being very good at something like fantasy football, and suggest there's some kind of Rain Man element to it. How do you think the correlation goes between his ability at chess and his ability at fantasy football? He's played it off as luck, but is there something more to it than that?
There's certainly an amount of luck in fantasy football, but as far as I understand, he's been pretty good at this for a couple of seasons now. It's just this season that he's doing exceptionally well. I don't think he necessarily can explain it himself, but I can imagine it certainly doesn't hurt to be a genius if you want to be good at it. He follows a lot of football. He has a lot of time. While he's a professional chess player, he doesn't do only chess. Of course, he is good at remembering details. He has a photographic memory. So that must certainly help. I guess a combination of all those helps. That must certainly explain some of it.
The skills required to be good at chess are well known, but what about the skills required to be good at fantasy football?
There's a lot of crossovers between chess and fantasy football.
David Munday is the editor of Fantasy Football Scout.
Sort of largely revolves around advanced planning and always making sure you're several moves ahead of your opponent. And that's pretty much one of the key points of being good at FPL is to think more than just about the game week that you're about to play in, but all of the ones beyond that. It's a great achievement, of course, but to hear that it was a chess player, I'm not massively surprised.
Are there any other celebrity fantasy football players?
I have to give a shout out really to my former boss actually at Fantasy Football Scout, Mark Sovens, who arguably is to some extent a celebrity because of his FPL pedigree, where he's the type of player who regularly finishes in top 1,000 or top 10,000.
We got up on your screen your season history. So there's 8 top 5k finishes, 4 in the top 500 and 1 in the top 50 in 2014-15. You're on course, hopefully, for at least your 9th top 5k finish, even higher perhaps, with a current rank inside the top 3k.
Really has just kind of, built up a persona of just being a guy who's impossibly brilliant at FPL. Outside of that, I can't think of too many others.
What about other professions? Are there any other professions you think score quite highly in FPL?
There's a lot of crossovers, for example, with people who work with numbers or work with sort of complex thought processes. So, for example, we've quite well connected with a few people who might have perhaps a PhD in statistics when it comes down to kind of weighing up the different probabilities of what may or may not happen with certain assets. They've already got that kind of crossover. For example, we've got Chris Atkinson, who has designed our Rate My Team tool, who has that background, and that's what helped him build effectively a formula that helps FPL managers kind of make decisions based on all numbers of probabilities that combine things like how often a player's shot in the last few game weeks, how often the team he's about to play has conceded shots in certain places, and things like that. So anything that involves analysis of a data set, if you've got that pre-existing skill, then applying it to fantasy football is actually quite easy.
Magnus Carlsen put a lot of his success down to sheer luck. How modest do you think he's being there? How much luck do you need to be really high up in the leagues?
Well, you definitely need to have some luck. I mean, that's, I think, unavoidable because there's so many different things that can happen in FPL. I mean, you can think back over several numbers of years, just freak events happening in football. I mean, there's been a couple of times when Sergio Aguero, for example, has ended up not being able to play because he had a car crash. You can't really legislate for that. Or, there's the Darren Bent goal which went in off a beach ball. There's all sorts of things that can happen in football. I'm a firm believer in there being a combination of skill and luck. There is such a thing as the wrong transfer, the wrong decision. If you bring in a player who's injury prone, or you bring in a player who doesn't always start games or picks up lots of yellow cards, then to me that's the wrong decision. And if you avoid those players, it's the right decision. You really have to combine luck and skill, in my personal opinion.
Magnus Carlsen is clearly a good player because he's regularly finishing in the top 3,000. So what would you say is a good finishing position for a player like that?
If you consider yourself a committed player, then I guess the holy grail really, I suppose it's cost to win the thing. The top 3,000 again is a good aim. In terms of realistic, I would suggest top 10k is the kind of the standard. That's what you aim for. On Fantasy Football Scout, we actually analyse what that grouping of managers are doing every week to help our readers try to get into that area of the ranking. So, it all depends on your own outlook. Aim for the top 10k if you want to be able to say you're good at FPL. If you want to consider yourself elite, like Magnus Carlsen, then perhaps the top 3,000 is a more ambitious, but not necessarily unrealistic thing to look at.
The first thing that I ever seen about it, my mate was saying I was a defender on it. So that was like, well, I'll be a good one because I'm not a defender, so hopefully I can get a couple of goals and assists.
Obviously, a lot has been made about Magnus Carlsen having Sheffield United's John Lundstrom, a player who's exceeded expectations this season, partly because he's come up from a lower division, but also partly because you wouldn't expect Sheffield United to do so well. Is that just a lucky pick on Carlsen's part, or do you think there's some deeper logic behind it?
I don't think John Lundstrom is luck, and I have a massive vested interest on this. A lot of people who sort of follow me on Twitter will know I'm obsessed with John Lundstrom. I have a Sheffield United shirt with his name on the back and everything, simply because we at Fantasy Football Scout kind of identified him at the start of the season. It's something that we like to do every year, is we track pre-season matches in excruciating levels of detail, which some people at first think is, do you really need to be doing that? But it pays dividends every time, because we noticed John Lundstrom within 2 or 3 matches of Sheffield United's pre-season. He was he's not a defender at all, but classified as one in the game, 4 million, because he probably wasn't going to play too many games. But we noticed he was playing in every match, getting goals and assists as well. So we said, well, if you're going to look for a 4 million defender, I think he's going to be the guy. And of course, the other thing was that some fans were saying he was going to leave the club, but Chris Wilder said no, he's going to stay and he's going to play his part. Kind of comes back to the research element I was talking about earlier, is that if you sort of researched fantasy football over the start of the summer, you'd then notice John Lundstrom, so that he was sat in your team for game week 1. And those of us who've had him since game week 1, it's been an emotional journey. We never expected him to be as good as this. We thought he'd be this year's Aaron Wan-Bissaka, but he's completely blown him out of the water. I mean, we're never going to have anything like it again because there was a misclassification. But, I mean, I can't speak for Magnus Carlsen as to whether or not he put him in out of luck, but bearing in mind the skills I know he must have as an elite level chess player, I'm sure he did his research and I'm sure he noticed on Fantasy Football Scout that John Lundstrom was the man to have at the start of the season. So certainly it's skill to owning John Lundstrom, I would say, this season.
So, chess and fantasy football. Is there a link, or is Magnus Carlsen just a weird anomaly?
I think there has to be a link. I really do. I mean, that's not to say that every chess player is going to be good at FPL or that every FPL player is going to be good at chess. I mean, I'm rubbish at chess. There might not be a link across the board, but as I said, I'm not surprised at all to hear that someone who, you know, must have the ability to think more than just in the present, think about all the permutations of moves further down the line, because obviously when you're playing chess you can plan your own moves, but of course sometimes you're going to have to respond to external influences, and that's what fantasy football is. You can plan all you like for the next 6 game weeks, but if one of your players gets injured, you know, that's akin to, oh no, that guy's moved the bishop here, or, you know, maybe you know, Man City all of a sudden stop scoring goals, you know, that's, you know, oh no, I've lost my queen now. There's elements of similarity in having a plan, but also having the ability to mould it as you move along based on what your opponents are doing. There's lots of transferable skills there. So yeah, as I said, I'm not at all surprised that someone who's good at chess is good at FPL as well.
David Munday is the editor at Fantasy Football Scout. Tarjei Svensen is front editor at Scandinavia Online and chess journalist at Matt and Patt. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoy this podcast, why not rate and review on iTunes or share an episode with a friend? See you next time.